family. Welcome to the Joyful House and Once Upon a Storybook. We are continuing the Anne of Green Gables series with Anne of the Island, which is the third book in the series. It is so good to be here with you on this Sunday afternoon. I missed being with you last Sunday, but hope you had a happy and safe Memorial Weekend. Because we did not meet together, we are going to do 3 chapters today instead of 2. We're going to do chapter 31, Anne to Philippa, chapter 32, Tea with Miss Douglas, and chapter 33, He Just Kept Coming and Coming. So if you will, sit back and relax, and let's enjoy the adventure of these 3 chapters. Chapter 31, Anne to Philippa. Anne Shirley to Philippa Gordon, greeting. Well, beloved, it's high time I was writing you. Here I am, installed once more as a country schoolma'am at Valley Road, boarding at Wayside, the home of Miss Janet Sweet. Janet is a dear soul and very nice looking, tall, but not over tall, stoutish, yet with a certain restraint of outline suggested of a thrifty soul who is not going to be over lavished even in the matter of arvadupious. I had to look that up, my friends. That just means, it's used a lot in English-speaking countries like France, but it means weight and heaviness, especially related to the body. All right. But she is not going to be over lavish even in the matter of arvadupious, meaning being a bigger woman. She has a knot of soft, crimpy brown hair with a thread of gray in it, a sunny face with rosy cheeks, and big eyes as blue as forget-me-nots. Moreover, she is one of those delightful old-fashioned cooks who don't care a bit if they ruin your digestion as long as they can give you feast of fat things. I like her, and she likes me, principally. It seems because she had a sister named Anne who died young. I'm real glad to see you, she said briskly when I landed in her yard. My, you don't look a mite like I expected. I was sure you'd be dark. My sister Anne was dark. And here you are, red-headed. For a few minutes, I thought I wasn't going to like Janet as much as I had expected at first sight. But then I reminded myself that I really must be more sensible than to be prejudiced against anyone simply because she called my hair red. Probably the word auburn was not in Janet's vocabulary at all. Wayside is a dear sort of little spot. The house is small and white, set down in a delightful little hollow that drops away from the road. Between road and house is an orchard and flower garden all mixed up together. The front door walk is bordered with quahog clamshells, cowhawks is what Janet calls them, and there is Virginia creeper over the porch and moss on the roof. My room is a neat little spot off the parlor, just big enough for the bed and me. Over the head of my bed there's a picture of Robbie Burns standing at Highland Mary's grave, shadowed by an enormous weeping willow tree. Robbie's face is so lugubrious that it no wonder I have had bad dreams. Why, the first night I was here, I dreamed I couldn't laugh. The parlor is tiny and neat. Its one window is so shaded by a huge willow that the room has a grotto-like effect of emerald gloom. There are wonderful tidies on the chairs and gay mats on the floor, and books and cards carefully arranged on a round table, and vases of dried grass on the mantelpiece. Between the vases is a cheerful decoration of preserved coffin plates, 5 in all, pertaining respectively to Janet's father and mother, a brother, her sister Anne, and a hired man who died here once. If I go suddenly insane of these days, know all men by these presents that those coffin plates have cost it. But it's all delightful, and I said so. Janet loved me for it, just as she detested poor Esther because Esther had said so much shade was unhygienic and had objected to sleeping on a feather bed. Now I glory in feather beds, and the more unhygienic and feathery they are, the more I glory. Janet says it is such a comfort to see me eat. She had been so afraid I'd be like Mrs. Haythorne, who wouldn't eat anything but fruit and hot water for breakfast, and tried to make Janet give up frying things. Esther is really a dear girl, but she is rather given to fads. The trouble is, she hasn't enough imagination and has a tendency to indigestion. Janet told me I could have the use of the parlor when any young men called. I don't think there will be many to call. I haven't seen a young man in Valley Road yet except the next-door hired boy, Sam Tolliver, a very tall, lank, tow-haired youth. He came over one evening recently and sat for an hour on the garden fence near the front porch where Janet and I were doing fancy work. The only remarks he volunteered in all that time were, "Have a peppermint, miss?" "Do? Now? Fine thing for a catarrh, peppermints, and powerful lot of jumping grasses round here tonight, yep. But there is a love affair going on here. It seems to be my fortune to be mixed up more or less actively with elderly love affairs. Mr. and Mrs. Irvin always say that I brought about their marriage. Mrs. Stephen Clark of Cromarty persists in being most grateful to me for a suggestion which somebody else would probably have made if I hadn't. I do really think, though, that Ludovic Speed would never have gotten any further along than placid courtship if I had not helped him and Theodora Dix out. In the present affair, I am only a passive spectator. I tried once to help things along and made an awful mess of it, so I shall not meddle again. I'll tell you all about it when we meet." All right, Chapter 32, Tea with Mrs. Douglas. On the first Thursday night of Anne's sojourn in Valley Road, Janet asked her to go to prayer meeting. Janet blossomed out like a rose to attend that prayer meeting. She wore a pale blue, pansy-sprinkled muslin dress and more ruffles than one could ever have supposed economical Janet could be guilty of, and a white leghorn hat with pink roses and 3 ostrich feathers on it. Anne felt quite amazed. Later on, she found out Janet's motive in so arraying herself, a motive as old as Eden. Valley Road prayer meeting seemed to be essentially feminine. There were 32 women present, 2 half-grown boys, and 1 solitary man, besides the minister. Anne found herself studying this man. He was not handsome or young or graceful. He had remarkably long legs, so long that he had to keep them coiled up under his chair to dispose of them, and he was stoop-shouldered. His hands were big, his hair wanted barbering, and his mustache was unkempt. But Anne thought she liked his face. It was kind and honest and tender. There was something else in it, too. Just what, Anne found it hard to define. She finally concluded that this man had suffered and been strong, and it had been made manifest in his face. There was a sort of patient, humorous endurance in his expression, which indicated that he would go to the stake if need be, but would keep on looking pleasant until he really had to begin squirming. When prayer meeting was over, this man came up to Janet and said, "May I see you home, Janet?" Janet took his arm, as primly and shyly as if she were no more than 16, having her first escort home. Anne told the girls at Patty's place later on. "Miss Shirley, permit me to introduce Mr. Douglas," she said stiffly. Mr. Douglas nodded and said, "I was looking at you in prayer meeting, miss, and thinking what a nice little girl you were." Such a speech from 99 people out of 100 would have annoyed Anne bitterly. But the way in which Mr. Douglas said it made her feel that she had received a very real and pleasing compliment. She smiled appreciatively at him and dropped obligingly behind on the moonlit road. So Janet had a beau. Anne was delighted. Janet would make a paragon of a wife, cheery, economical, tolerant, and a very queen of cooks. It would be a flagrant waste on nature's part to keep her a permanent old maid. "John Douglas asked me to take you up to see his mother," said Janet the next day. "She's bedrid a lot of the time and never goes out of the house, but she's powerful fond of company and always wants to see my boarders. Can you go up this evening?" Anne assented, but later in the day Mr. Douglas called on his mother's behalf to invite them up to tea on Saturday evening. "Oh, why didn't you put on your pretty pansy dress?" asked Anne when they left home. It was a hot day, and poor Janet, between her excitement and her heavy black cashmere dress, looked as if she were being broiled alive. Old Mrs. Douglas would think it terrible frivolous and unsuitable, I'm afraid. John likes that dress, though, she added wistfully. The old Douglas homestead was half a mile from Wayside, cresting a windy hill. The house itself was large and comfortable, old enough to be dignified, and griddled with maple groves and orchards. There were big, trim barns behind it, and everything bespoke prosperity. Whatever the patient endurance in Mr. Douglas' face had meant, it hadn't, so Anne reflected, means debts and duns. John Douglas met them at the door and took them into the sitting room where his mother was enthroned in an armchair. Anne had expected old Miss Douglas to be tall and thin because Mr. Douglas was. Instead, she was a tiny scrap of a woman with soft pink cheeks, mild blue eyes, and a mouth like a baby's, dressed in a beautiful, fashionably made black silk dress with a fluffy white shawl over her shoulders, and her snowy hair surmounted by a dainty lace cap. She might have posed as a grandmother doll. "How do you do, Janet, dear?" she said sweetly. "I am so glad to see you again, dear." She put up her pretty old face to be kissed. "And this is our new teacher. I'm delighted to meet you. My son has been singing your praises until I'm half jealous, and I'm sure Janet ought to be wholly so." Poor Janet blushed. Anne said something polite and conventional, and then everybody sat down and made talk. It was hard work, even for Anne, for nobody seemed at ease except old Mrs. Douglas, who certainly did not find any difficulty in talking. She made Janet sit by her and stroked her hand occasionally. Janet sat and smiled, looking horribly uncomfortable in her hideous dress, and John Douglas sat without smiling. At the tea table, Mrs. Douglas gracefully asked Janet to pour the tea. Janet turned redder than ever, but did it. Anne wrote a description of that meal to Stella. "We had cold tongue and chicken and strawberry preserves, lemon pie and tarts and chocolate cake and raisin cookies and pound cake and fruit cake and a few other things, including more pie. Caramel pie, I think it was. After I'd eaten twice as much as was good for me, Mrs. Douglas sighed and said she feared she had nothing to tempt my appetite." "I'm afraid dear Janet's cooking has spoiled you for any other," she said sweetly. "Of course, nobody in Valley Road aspires to rival her." "Won't you have another piece of pie, Miss Shirley? You haven't eaten anything." "Stella, I hadn't eaten a helping of tongue and one of chicken." "I had eaten a helping of tongue and one of chicken, 3 biscuits, a generous allowance of preserves, a piece of pie, a tart, and a square of chocolate cake." After tea, Miss Douglas smiled benevolently and told John to take dear Janet out into the garden and get her some roses. "Miss Shirley will keep me company while you're out, won't you?" she said plaintively. She settled down in her armchair with a sigh. "I'm a very frail old woman, Miss Shirley. For over 20 years, I've been a great sufferer. For 20 long, weary years, I've been dying by inches." "How painful," said Anne, trying to be sympathetic and succeeding only in feeling idiotic. "There have been scores of nights when they've thought I would never live to see the dawn," went on Miss Douglas solemnly. "Nobody knows what I've gone through. Nobody can know but myself. Well, it can't last very much longer. My weary pilgrimage will be over soon, Miss Shirley. It is a great comfort to me that John will have such a good wife to look after when his mother is gone. A great comfort, Miss Shirley." "Janet is a lovely woman," said Anne warmly. "Lovely? A beautiful character," assented Miss Douglas. "And a perfect housekeeper, something I never was." My health would not permit it, Miss Shirley. I'm indeed thankful that John has made such a wise choice. I hope and believe that he will be happy. He is my only son, Miss Shirley, and his happiness lies very near my heart." "Of course," said Anne stupidly. For the first time in her life she was stupid, yet she could not imagine why. She seemed to have absolutely nothing to say to this sweet, smiling, angelic old lady who was patting her hand so kindly. "Come and see me as soon again, dear Janet," said Miss Douglas lovingly when they left. "You don't come half often enough, but then I suppose John will be bringing you here to stay all the time one of these days." Anne, happening to glance at John Douglas as his mother spoke, gave a positive start of dismay. He looked as a tortured man might look when his tormentors gave the rack the last turn of possible endurance. She felt sure he must be ill and hurried poor, blushing Janet away. "Isn't old Miss Douglas a sweet woman?" asked Janet as they went down the road. "Mm-hmm," answered Anne absently. She was wondering why John Douglas had looked so. "She's been a terrible sufferer," said Janet feelingly. "She takes terrible spells. It keeps John all worried up. He's scared to leave home for fear his mother will take a spell and nobody'll be there but the hired girl." Chapter 33. He just kept coming and coming. 3 days later, Anne came home from school and found Janet crying. Tears and Janet seemed so incongruous that Anne was honestly alarmed. "Oh, what is the matter?" she cried anxiously. I'm 40 today," sobbed Janet. "Well, you were nearly that yesterday and it didn't hurt," comforted Anne, trying not to smile. But, went on Janet with a big gulp, "John Douglas won't ask me to marry him." "Oh, but he will," said Anne lamely. "You must give him time, Janet." "Time?" said Janet with indescribable scorn. "He has had 20 years. How much time does he want?" "Do you mean that John Douglas has been coming to see you for 20 years? "He has, and he's never so much as mentioned marriage to me, and I don't believe he ever will now. I've never said a word to a mortal about it, but it seems to me I've just got to talk it out with someone at last or go crazy. John Douglas begun to go with me 20 years ago before Mother died. Well, he kept coming and coming, and after a spell I begun making quilts and things, but he never said anything about getting married, only just kept coming and coming. There wasn't anything I could do. Mother died when we'd been going together for 8 years. I thought maybe he would speak out then, seeing as I was left alone in the world. He was real kind and feeling and did everything he could for me, but he never said marry, and that's the way it's been going on ever since. People blame me for it. They say I won't marry him because his mother is so sickly and I don't want the bother of waiting on her. Why, I'd love to wait on John's mother, but I let them think so. I'd rather them blame me than pity me. It's so dreadful, humiliating that John won't ask me, and why won't he? Seems to me if I only knew his reason, I wouldn't mind it so much. Perhaps his mother doesn't want him to marry anybody, suggested Anne. Oh, she does. She told me time and again that she'd love to see John settle before her time comes. She's always given him hints. You heard her yourself the other day. I thought I'd gone through the floor. It's beyond me, said Anne helplessly. She thought of Ludwig Speed, but the cases were not parallel. John Douglas was not a man of Ludwig's type. You should show more spirit, Janet, she went on resolutely. Why didn't you send him about his business long ago? I couldn't, said poor Janet pathetically. You see, Anne, I've always been awful fond of John. He might just as well keep coming as not, for there was never anybody else I'd want, so it didn't matter. But it might have made him speak out like a man, urged Anne. Janet shook her head. No, I guess not. I was afraid to try, anyway, for fear he'd think I meant it and just go. I suppose I'm a poor-spirited creature, but that's how I feel, and I can't help it. Oh, you could help it, Janet. It isn't too late yet. Take a firm stand. Let that man know you are not going to endure his shilly-shallying any longer. I'll back you up. I don't know, said Janet hopelessly. I don't know if I could ever get up enough spunk. Things have drifted so long. But I'll think it over. Anne felt that she was disappointed in John Douglas. She had liked him so well, and she had not thought him that sort of man who would play fast and loose with a woman's feelings for 20 years. He certainly should be taught a lesson, and Anne felt vindictively that she would enjoy seeing the process. Therefore, she was delighted when Janet told her as they were going to prayer meeting the next night that she meant to show some spirit. Some spirit. I'll let John Douglas see I'm not going to be trodden on any longer. You are perfectly right, said Anne emphatically. When prayer meeting was over, John Douglas came up with his usual request, and Janet looked frightened but resolute. No, thank you, she said icily. I know the road home pretty well alone. I ought to, seeing I've been traveling it for 40 years. So you needn't trouble yourself, Mr. Douglas. Anne was looking at John Douglas, and in that brilliant moonlight she saw the last twist of the rack again. Without a word, he turned and he strode down the road. Stop, stop, Anne called wildly after him, not caring in the least for the other dumbfounded onlookers. Mr. Douglas, stop. Come back. John Douglas stopped, but he did not come back. Anne flew down the road, caught his arm, and fairly dragged him back to Janet. You must come back, she said imploringly. It's all a mistake, Mr. Douglas, all my fault. I made Janet do it. She didn't want to, but it's all right now, isn't it, Janet? Without a word, Janet took his arm and walked away. Anne followed them meekly home and slipped in by the back door. Well, you are a nice person to back one up, said Janet sarcastically. I couldn't help it, Janet, said Anne repentively. I just felt as if I had stood by and seen murder done. I had to run after him. Oh, and I'm just as glad you did. When I saw John Douglas making off down that road, I just felt as if every little bit of joy and happiness that was left in my life was going with him. It was an awful feeling. Well, did he ask you why you did it? Asked Anne. No, he never said a word about it, replied Janet dully. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed those 3 chapters. Can't wait to find out what happens with Janet and Mr. John Douglas. And hopefully he'll ask her to marry him soon. Well, thank you for joining me. Hope you enjoyed this storybook adventure, and I look forward to seeing you next week as we continue reading Anne of the Island. Take care and have a wonderful week. Nugs and joy, my friends. Be joyful and be the joy in everything you do. Mwah. Bye. God bless.